The spotlight hit Johnny Cash like a blade of pure white heat, and 18,000 people at the Houston Astrodome erupted into chaos. But the man in black wasn't looking at them. His eyes were locked on a young Marine in dress blues, standing ramrod straight in the third row, tears streaming down his 22-year-old face. This was supposed to be just another stop on the 1991 tour, another arena, another crowd. Another night of singing Folsom Prison blues and Ring of Fire to people who knew every word. But Lance Corporal Timothy Brennan had changed everything with a single sign, hand-painted on cardboard. "Mr. Cash, I ship to Iraq tomorrow. Your music got me through boot camp." Johnny's jaw tightened. His fingers, already arthritic at 59, gripped the neck of his beloved Martin guitar, the same black acoustic he'd played at Folsom Prison 23 years earlier. The same guitar that had been with him through addiction, recovery, June's love, and more comebacks than any man deserved. And in that moment, staring at that young Marine, Johnny Cash made a decision that would ripple through 18,000 souls and beyond. But to understand what happened next, you need to know what brought Timothy Brennan to that arena. 6 months earlier, he'd been working at his father's auto shop in Conroe, Texas, listening to his grandfather's old Johnny Cash albums while rebuilding transmissions. His grandfather, William Brennan, had served 3 tours in Vietnam, and when he came home broken in 1970, it was Johnny Cash's music that helped him sleep through the nightmares. That voice, William would tell young Timothy, understood darkness, but more importantly, it understood climbing out of it. When Timothy enlisted in the Marines that spring of 1991, his grandfather gave him a cassette tape, a bootleg recording of Johnny Cash playing for troops in Vietnam, December 1969. Timothy played that tape until it literally fell apart during basic training at Paris Island. When his drill instructor found him listening to it after lights out, instead of punishment, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez just nodded and said, "Cash got me through Tet. Carry on, Marine." Now, 3 days before deployment to Operation Desert Storm, Timothy had spent his last paycheck on a ticket to see Johnny Cash live. He'd made that sign in his motel room that afternoon, using a Sharpie marker his sister had sent in a care package. He never expected Johnny to see it. The Astrodome held 18,000 people. He was just one face in an ocean of faces. But June Carter Cash saw the sign first. She was standing in the wings, watching her husband perform, when she spotted the Marine. She knew that look in the young man's eyes. She'd seen it in Johnny's eyes when he'd returned from his own time in Germany with the Air Force, carrying demons he wouldn't talk about for years. She walked onto the stage, something she rarely did outside of their duet numbers, and whispered in Johnny's ear. The music stopped. The band, Luther Perkins on guitar, Marshall Grant on bass, and W.S. Holland on drums, looked confused. They weren't supposed to stop until after Sunday morning coming down. The 18,000 people in the Astrodome fell silent, that peculiar silence that only happens when thousands of people stop breathing at the same time. Johnny spoke into the microphone, his voice like gravel soaked in honey. "There's a young Marine here tonight, 3rd row. Son, what's your name?" Timothy tried to speak but couldn't. His squad leader, Sergeant Marcus Williams, who'd come with him, had to answer for him. "Lance Corporal Timothy Brennan, sir." Johnny nodded slowly. "Timothy, I see your sign. When do you ship out?" "Oh, 500 hours, day after tomorrow, sir." Timothy's voice cracked like a teenager's, though he'd turned 22 just the week before. "Iraq?" "Yes, sir. 1st Marine Division." Johnny Cash set down his microphone. The sound system squealed briefly, then went quiet. He walked to the edge of the stage, his black boots clicking against the wood like a countdown. Security moved to help him down, but he waved them off. At 59, Johnny Cash climbed down from that stage with the determination of a man with a mission. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. People pressed back, creating a corridor. Someone started to clap slowly, but stopped. This wasn't a moment for applause. This was something else, something sacred. When Johnny reached Timothy, the young Marine started to salute, but Johnny caught his hand and shook it instead. Up close, Timothy could see the scars on Johnny's face from his near-death experience in 1967, could smell the mixture of leather and aftershave, could see that the man in black's eyes were actually a deep, understanding brown. "Your grandfather served?" Johnny asked quietly, though his voice still carried in the silence. "Vietnam, sir. 67 through 70. I played for those boys, Long Bin, Da Nang, places that weren't on any tour schedule." Johnny's voice dropped even lower. "Your grandfather make it home?" "He did, sir. Said your music helped." Johnny nodded, then did something that made June gasp from the stage. He unslung his Martin guitar, the black one, the Folsom Prison one, the one insured for more money than most people's houses, and held it out to Timothy. "No, sir, I couldn't." Timothy stepped back. "Son," Johnny's voice turned firm, the way it did when he sang about redemption. "This guitar has been through hell and back with me. It's played for presidents and prisoners. It's been my confessor and my companion. But right now it needs to go with you." Timothy's hands shook as he took the guitar. The weight of it surprised him. Heavier than it looked, like it was carrying all those songs, all those stories. "But here's the thing," Johnny continued, loud enough now for everyone to hear. "This isn't a gift. It's a loan. You bring this back to me. You understand? You bring it back and you bring yourself back with it." That's when the 18,000 people exploded. The cheer that went up shook the Astrodome's roof. People were crying, hugging strangers, holding their lighters in the air like candles in a cathedral. The noise was deafening, primal, the sound of 18,000 hearts breaking and healing at the same time. But Johnny wasn't done. He turned to the crowd, climbed back on stage with surprising agility, and grabbed the microphone. "This young man is going to war for us, for all of us. And I want you to understand something." His voice thundered through the arena. "That guitar has my phone number taped inside the case. Timothy, you call me from wherever you are, whenever you need to. You call me and you tell me you're okay." June was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. The band stood frozen. Luther Perkins later said it was the only time in 30 years he'd seen Johnny give away a guitar. "And one more thing," Johnny added, his voice breaking slightly. "When you get where you're going, you play that guitar for your brothers and sisters over there. You play it in the sand and the heat and the fear. You play Amazing Grace when someone doesn't make it home. You play Will the Circle Be Unbroken when morale is low. You make that guitar earn its trip." Timothy could only nod, clutching the guitar like a life preserver. Sergeant Williams had to practically carry him back to his seat. The crowd wouldn't stop cheering. 18,000 people on their feet, cheering for a young Marine with a borrowed guitar and an uncertain future. Johnny finished the concert without a guitar, just his voice and the band behind him. He sang "The Man Comes Around" a cappella, his voice filling every corner of that massive dome. When he got to the line about the whirlwind in the thorn tree, Timothy stood at attention, the guitar at his side like a rifle. But the story doesn't end there. Because Timothy Brennan did go to Iraq. He was part of the ground offensive that began on February 24, 1991. And he took that Martin guitar with him, wrapped in 3 layers of plastic and duct tape to protect it from the sand. On his second night in Iraq, with oil fires turning the sky black at noon and the sound of artillery like thunder that never stopped, Timothy unwrapped that guitar and played. He played Ring of Fire while tracers lit up the night sky. He played I Walk the Line while his unit waited for orders that might send them into harm's way. He played Peace in the Valley for a 19-year-old private from Ohio who didn't make it through a mortar attack. Word spread through the 1st Marine Division about the Marine with Johnny Cash's guitar. Officers who should have confiscated it as non-essential equipment instead requested private concerts. A colonel asked for Ragged Old Flag. A Navy corpsman requested Hurt, even though Johnny hadn't recorded it yet. He just wanted to hear something, anything, that might make sense of what they were seeing. Timothy called Johnny from a satellite phone on March 15, 1991. The connection was terrible, crackling with static and delay. But Johnny's voice came through clear. "You still got my guitar, son? Never leaves my side, Mr. Cash. Good. You keep playing it. Music is light in dark places. You be that light." The war ended faster than anyone expected. 100 hours of ground combat. But for Timothy and thousands like him, those 100 hours lasted lifetimes. He saw things that would wake him at 3 in the morning for years to come. But he also saw something else. The way music could transform a moment, could make 19-year-old kids from Iowa and 40-year-old sergeants from Detroit stop being scared for just 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the length of a song. Timothy Brennan came home on April 20th, 1991. His unit had suffered casualties, but he'd survived. The first thing he did after hugging his family was call Johnny Cash. "I've got your guitar, sir. When can I return it? You come to Nashville next week. Bring your grandfather." The meeting wasn't public. No cameras, no reporters. Just Johnny and June, Timothy and his grandfather William in Johnny's home studio outside Nashville. Timothy tried to give the guitar back, but Johnny shook his head. "Play me something first, something you played over there." Timothy played Amazing Grace, the way he'd played it in the desert, slow and mournful, and somehow hopeful. William Brennan, the Vietnam veteran who hadn't cried since 1970, sobbed like a child. Johnny and June held hands, their own eyes wet. When Timothy finished, Johnny stood up and walked to his wall of guitars. He took down another one, a newer Martin, and handed it to Timothy. "This one's yours, that one." He pointed to the black guitar. "That one already is. It went to war. It brought you home. It belongs to you now." "Sir, I can't." "Son, that guitar has one more mission. You're going to play it for other veterans. You're going to play it at hospitals and revival meetings and anywhere broken people need to hear that they can be whole again. That's an order from a fellow serviceman." Timothy kept that promise. For the next 20 years, until Johnny's death in September 2003, Timothy Brennan played that guitar at veterans' hospitals, at funerals for fallen Marines, at support groups for soldiers dealing with PTSD. He started a foundation called Cash for Combat Vets that provided music therapy for returning service members. At Johnny Cash's funeral, Timothy was invited to play. He stood before presidents and celebrities, before June's grieving family and Johnny's children, and played "The Man Comes Around" on that same black Martin guitar. When he finished, he spoke into the microphone. "Johnny Cash gave me this guitar in front of 18,000 people. But more than that, he gave me a mission. He taught me that music isn't just entertainment. It's medicine. It's hope. It's a lifeline thrown into the darkness." Timothy paused, his voice steady now, no longer the 22-year-old kid who couldn't speak in the Astrodome. "Mr. Cash once told me that he didn't save my life with this guitar. He said I saved his. He said knowing that his music was still doing what it was meant to do, reaching into the darkness and pulling people toward the light, that's what kept him going in his final years. Today, that black Martin guitar sits in the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville. The placard beneath it doesn't mention its value or its famous original owner. It simply says, "This guitar went to war and came home." Like the men and women who carried it, it bears its scars with dignity. On loan from Lance Corporal Timothy Brennan, USMC, retired. But Timothy still plays it once a year, every February 24th, the anniversary of the ground war in Iraq. He plays it at a different veterans' hospital each year, for men and women who understand that sometimes the only thing standing between you and the darkness is 3 chords and the truth. The 18,000 people who witnessed Johnny Cash give his guitar to a Marine that night in Houston still talk about it. There's no official recording, no video footage, just the memory of a moment when a legend recognized a young warrior and decided that some things matter more than possessions, more than insurance values, more than historical artifacts. What Johnny Cash understood that night was something Timothy's grandfather had learned in Vietnam, something Timothy would learn in Iraq, something every generation discovers in its own wars. Music doesn't just soundtrack our lives. Sometimes it saves them. June Carter Cash, in an interview 6 months before her death in May 2003, said this: "People ask me about Johnny's greatest performance. They expect me to say Folsom Prison or the White House or Carnegie Hall, but it was that night in Houston. That night, Johnny didn't just play music. He passed it forward. He looked at that young Marine and saw himself, saw every lost soul he'd ever played for, and he did the only thing that made sense. He armed that boy with the one weapon Johnny knew could fight the kind of battles that were coming. Not the physical battles, the ones that come after, in the quiet moments when the war is over, but the fighting isn't." Here's the incredible part that most people don't know. Timothy Brennan wasn't the only service member Johnny gave a guitar to. After that night in Houston, Johnny started what he called the Six String Soldiers program. Over the next 12 years, until his death, he gave away 47 guitars to deploying service members. Each one came with the same conditions: bring it back, play it for your brothers and sisters, use it to fight the darkness. 47 guitars, 47 warriors, 45 came home. The two that didn't, one is buried at Arlington with Army Specialist Michael Patterson, who died in Afghanistan in 2002. The other was recovered from a Humvee in Iraq and now sits in the Pentagon, a reminder that sometimes the casualties of war can't be measured in numbers alone. But this story, the first story, the one that started it all, this story reminds us that sometimes a single act of generosity can ripple through thousands of lives. Johnny Cash gave away a guitar worth more than most people's annual salary, but what he really gave away was hope, permission to feel, a tool for healing, a mission that outlasted his own life. So I'll leave you with this question: what are you holding on to that someone else needs more than you do? What guitar is hanging on your wall that should be in the hands of someone heading into battle, whatever their battle might be? Because here's what Johnny Cash knew that night in Houston, with 18,000 people cheering and a young Marine clutching a guitar like salvation itself: the things we give away are the only things we keep forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about moments when humanity triumphed over fame, when generosity conquered fear, when 18,000 people witnessed something that money could never buy. And remember, in Johnny's own words, you build on failure. You use it as a stepping stone. Close the door on the past. You don't try to forget the mistakes, but you don't dwell on it. You don't let it have any of your energy, or any of your time, or any of your space. Timothy Brennan still has that guitar. He's 64 years old now, a grandfather himself, and sometimes late at night he takes it out and plays Ring of Fire for his grandson, who just enlisted in the Marines. The circle, as June Carter Cash would say, remains unbroken. The 18,000 people who cheered that night didn't just witness a gift. They witnessed a promise that music transcends ownership, that generosity multiplies when shared, that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone heading into darkness is a way to create their own light. And that promise, like that guitar, like that music, like that moment when 18,000 people became one voice, that promise never dies. It just waits for the next person brave enough to pass it on.